Johnny, nice ring to it. I don't think so.
I just realized something. As I'm writing these words onto my notepad, I noticed that it's been 20 years to the day since I was a kid picking up Metal Gear Solid 3 from a local Blockbuster video. My dad drove me up on a cold Michigan night. I scurried into his car as thrilled as can be, looking at the cover little by little as we passed under streetlights on the way home. I played the game so much, it was a masterpiece. Looking back, I can barely comprehend how much has changed since that cold November night in 2004. But one thing remains unchanged. Snake Eater is still a masterpiece. Following the heavy themes of Metal Gear Solid 2, such as information control, transhumanism, agency, the passing of one's legacy, and so forth, Snake Eater sought to ground things a little. Personally, I love the story in Sons of Liberty, and thankfully it's becoming more appreciated these days as it's more relevant, frighteningly. However, it did seem like series creator Hideo Kojima wrote himself into a bit of a hole near the end. Protagonist Solid Snake learns that members of the Illuminati-esque group known as the Patriots have all been dead for about 100 years. Whoa. Get back. By crafting the third game as a prequel set in the 1960s, Kojima-san could back off a little bit from some of that peculiar stuff. Now, being that it's Kojima, he couldn't help incorporate similarly loquacious stuff in Part 3. There's a story about the Philosophers, the group that preceded the Patriots, who were made up of the most powerful people in the world. The group was funded by a tremendous sum of money gathered after World War II known as the Legacy. So yeah, there's still a little bit of that winding conspiratorial lore that the series is known for, but overall, the story is much more digestible in Part 3. Sons of Liberty saw the protagonist arguing with AI over codec. In Snake Eater, the beating heart of the game's plot is in its very human characters, specifically the story between Snake and his former mentor, the Boss. In 1964, CIA operative and former Green Beret, Snake, is sent on a singleton mission to retrieve USSR scientist Nikolai Sokolov from Selinoyarsk. Sokolov had escaped with his family a few years prior. His wife and child made it to America, but Russia demanded the US return Sokolov or they would not remove their missiles from Cuba. This is one of the examples of the use of hyperreality, a storytelling method wherein Kojima could weave in his fictional characters into very real historical events of the time, and it's all over Snake Eater. Sokolov is being forced to finish development on the Shagohod, this game's Metal Gear. See, if you didn't know, just about every Metal Gear game has its own big mech-type enemy known colloquially as a Metal Gear. The US wants the machine destroyed to smuggle out Sokolov and develop their own Metal Gear to end the Cold War and maintain their position as the world's dominant superpower. During the mission, we're introduced to our support staff with excellent characters like Major Tom, eventually known forevermore as Major Zero. I always appreciate the Bowie references in Kojima games. Zero would end up being a major villain in Metal Gear lore, but in Snake Eater he's a steadfast ally and a quirky, charming Englishman. A former SAS trooper with a love for the James Bond films, Zero was responsible for smuggling Sokolov and his family out of the USSR the first time. He's stern, keeping Snake focused during his mission, but offers care, dry humor, and support when things get dark, and they do. We're also introduced to Paramedic, the endearing medical support staffer with a massive knowledge of movies, clearly a Kojima self-insert, and I love it. Every time you save your game, she'll quiz Snake on a recent movie. Well, recent for the time period.
Snake, wouldn't you like to have a gun shaped like a pen?
What good is a pen gonna do me in the jungle? I'd look like a fool.
Then
I wonder if she's ever seen I Made a Cyborg Ninja and It Came Back to Kill Me. It was a good one.
Okay, now you're being ridiculous.
We're also introduced to the boss. In the modern era where Mary Sues are being passed off as strong and independent, the boss is written as a true hard-ass that earned her reputation through blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of each. The boss was Snake's mentor for 10 years and taught him skills like survival, evasion, medicine, and hand-to-hand combat, referred to as CQC. The relationship between the two characters forms the core of this game's tale and is a big reason why most people consider Snake Eater as their favorite in the series. On this first mission, the boss is on support to provide wisdom and advice for Snake. The interplay between the two characters is masterful and does an excellent job of establishing the backstory between the two. Things like the boss noticing the difference in Snake's voice based on his body weight. It demonstrates from early on that the boss knows Snake better than anybody, a critical detail that becomes more pertinent after the two become opposed. After Snake retrieves Sokolov, the two retreat toward the rendezvous point. Crossing a rope bridge, out of the mist emerges the boss herself, holding two large crates, one ICBM, a nuke, and a launcher. She announces that she's defecting to the Soviet Union and that she's taking Sokolov with her. Snake attempts to defend himself but is overwhelmed by the boss's superior CQC. She snaps his arm at the elbow and tosses him from the bridge. Sokolov is captured by the Pain, one of the members of the Cobras, the boss's former special mission unit. The Cobras were instrumental in carrying out high-risk missions against the Germans in World War II. Their code names reflect the particular emotion that each operator brought into battle, with call signs like the Pain, the Fury, the Fear, and even one for the boss herself, the Joy. Admittedly, some of this is a wee bit hokey, and I always chuckle in certain cutscenes when a character uses their code name in the third person. But hey man, that's Hideo Kojima's storytelling. Eccentric, ultra quirky characters going on extensive rants while showboating. They'll stand there dumping massive amounts of exposition to the player while Snake looks on. Some love it, some hate it, but hey, you can always skip the cutscenes if you'd rather get into the action instead. Personally, I really love the stuff with the Cobras in particular. I adore the over-the-top personality of each member and how their speech, mannerisms, and overall design reflects their unique codename. Again, it's a tad bit cheesy and very much on the nose. I mean, the guy's codename is the Fury and he's angry, but I'm a fan. I had read somewhere that Kojima floated the idea of Metal Gear 5 being a prequel where you played as the Cobras during World War II. I would have killed, figuratively, to swap out heavy-chested photosynthetic snipers for this Cobra prequel, and I love heavy chests.
Oh dear Christ!
Gotta find you.
After Snake goes base jumping, we see Colonel Volgin use the experimental nuclear ICBM known as the Davy Crockett against his own motherland by destroying a research facility, as Major Ocelot looks on in horror. This event has big implications going forward, but we'll get there. So, if the boss as an antagonist is presented as complex and with shades of gray, Yevgeny Volgin is downright evil. In keeping with the bombastic, over-the-top characters that Metal Gear is known for, Volgin can generate an electrical current of up to 10 million volts in his body that can be discharged at will, hence his nickname, Thunderbolt. He often holds ammunition between his fingers and heats the gunpowder with this current, essentially making him a human rifle. He's a sadist that takes pleasure in torture, and this is shown pretty graphically multiple times, while some of the darker stuff is just heavily implied. By launching the ICBM, tensions between Russia and the US are raised to a breaking point. Imagine that. This brings me back to hyperreality. In this case, the head of the USSR, Nikita Khrushchev, contacts United States President Lyndon B. Johnson, insisting that the president is aware of and possibly orchestrated the nuclear attack. Johnson is all like, "Nuh-uh," and Khrushchev is all like, "Yah-huh." In order to prove their innocence and prevent an all-out nuclear war, Johnson agrees to send in their best man, Snake, to eliminate the suspect, the boss, as neither of them know that it was actually Volgin that launched the nuke. If you've played through the Metal Gear series, you know the men of the Snake family have the shittiest luck, and it goes back to old Papa Snake here. Betrayed by his mentor, arm shattered, cliff dive, just mended, and oh by the way, you're going back to wipe out said mentor along with a giant bisexual lunatic that shoots 7.62 from his hands. And if you don't, you and Major Zero go to the firing squad, and the world erupts into nuclear chaos. No presh. Oh, and you heard me mention Ocelot. Arguably the most important character across the entire series, Snake Eater gives us a look at young Shalashaska. As many of us do, I love watching the evolution of young Ocelot from the cocky, brash wiener using a 9mm into an equally brash wiener using his signature single-action army revolver. Just as important as the dynamic is between the boss and Snake is the relationship between Ocelot and Snake. Ocelot's initial mockery and underestimation of Snake develops into respect and admiration. Each time Snake bests Ocelot in an exchange, we see the Major return with new tactics and gear as he's clearly taking notes from each encounter. By the end of the game, Ocelot clearly admires his fellow soldier. He even has a bit of fun by having a showdown with Blanks. It's also shown at the very end that Ocelot is a sneaky, manipulative agent of several different factions around the world, like the KGB and the CIA. He enjoys pitting sides against one another to further his own agenda, a theme that carries on for the remainder of the series. Revolver Ocelot is fantastic in Snake Eater. We also have other support cast members like Sigint. It's revealed in Metal Gear Solid 4 that Sigint became DARPA Chief Donald Anderson, a key player in the events of Shadow Moses during the first Metal Gear Solid. But even if all that never happened, Sigint stands on his own in Snake Eater. If you call him with a piece of gear equipped, he'll break down the item in detail for you, and I used to love listening to these descriptions. You learn about weaponry, survival gear, and even discuss some social issues that really mattered in the 60s. But as good as support staff and villains and all that are, the wild card in all of this is old Matka Pluka herself, Eva. As conniving as Ocelot is, Eva is really the ultimate actor in a plot rife with themes of betrayal and loyalty to the mission. Snake greets her under the pretense that she's simply a double agent, a codebreaker for the NSA working as a KGB agent under Khrushchev. At the very end of the game, Eva spends a romantic night with Big Boss, finally getting a poke from the Solid Snake. He wakes up the next day to a recording in which she explains that she didn't actually work for the US government or the Kremlin, but as an agent for the People's Liberation Army of China. She was sent to retrieve the philosopher's legacy, that massive sum of money that I had mentioned earlier. The Chinese wanted to retrieve the legacy to develop their own nuclear armaments as a way of staying competitive on the world stage. Ultimately, though Eva completes her mission, it's not so simple. She was also tasked with eliminating Snake at the conclusion of her mission, and she would have followed through if not for one reason, and it's not love. Eva used her feminine wiles and her incredible physique to lure Snake into a thirst trap, but she did develop actual feelings for him. She nearly lost her cover to protect him during torture at the hands of Volgin. An interference that cost Snake his right eye, leading to the famous eye patch. Despite this, it wasn't affection that kept Eva from assassinating Snake, it was the boss. The boss, in addition to many other legendary exploits, was an instructor at one of the philosopher's quote, charm schools. These academies were crafted to train children from a very young age to become the ultimate spy for the organization. Eva was raised at one of these academies, and the boss knew it. She was the only person that Eva couldn't fool with her act, and as such, saw a use for her. The boss wanted Snake to know the truth about who she was and what she did, and Eva promised to deliver, thus sparing Snake's life. Also, how heavy of a sleeper is this dude that he didn't hear her clanging around this cabin in the night? Jesus. Maybe it was nanomachines. So, what is the truth? Well, the boss didn't actually defect to the Soviet Union. Her mission, orchestrated by the US government, was to get close to Volgin and snatch the philosopher's legacy from him. The nuclear ICBM that she brought was a gift to Volgin and a show of loyalty and friendship, and the Cobras came with. The problem came when Volgin unexpectedly launched that nuke on his homeland. And that's why Volgin is so awesome as a character. For all the moral flexibility going around, the Colonel is an unhinged psychopath. And this nuke, as mentioned earlier, changed everything. The boss's mission changed from simply retrieving the legacy to getting the money and then passing it on to Snake before needing to die at his hands. Per the agreement between Khrushchev and Johnson, in order to prove American innocence and prevent nuclear war, it had to be Snake that put the final bullet in her. The boss, a true patriot, loyal to her mission, could never tell anyone, and she couldn't end her own life either. She was forced to go down in official history as a traitor to the US and a monster that nuked another nation, since the official story didn't include Volgin. Her reward was being buried in an unmarked grave. Oh, and this isn't her first major sacrifice. She also had to assassinate the Sorrow, a member of the Cobras and the father of her child, as they had been on opposing sides of a conflict at the time. Her child, by the way, turned out to be Revolver Ocelot. In the end, she retrieved the legacy and passed it on to Snake in their last battle. Her final mission was to die at the hands of her greatest student, and she followed through. The flowers turning red in the field symbolizes the change in Snake. He's no longer pure, forever altered. Upon waking up to Eva's tape, Snake realizes that he's been used as a puppet by his country to destroy the Shagohod and to basically bring back a bunch of money, all while being forced to kill the person he loved and admired the most. For his actions, he's awarded the title of Big Boss, which he accepts with bitter disgust. The final scene sees Big Boss walk to the boss's grave, placing her weapon and flowers before giving one final salute to the woman that saved the world. He sheds a tear as he laments her death at his hands. Big Boss is now determined to carry on her legacy, a world in which soldiers are no longer bound by governments, politicians, or the times. An army without borders. That was heavy. The story in Snake Eater is obviously rich and full of detail, but if you're one of those people that say Metal Gear Solid is just cutscenes, then have I got a wee little surprise for you. Okay, well, while the game is starting to show its age, especially compared to Metal Gear 4 and 5, the gameplay in Snake Eater is what keeps me coming back year after year. It's the familiar stealth action that the first two games had, but with many, many new layers. Out of the industrial corridors of the Big Shell or Shadow Moses, Snake Eater sees the player enter the jungle, and it's not a simple coat of paint. Varying terrain, wildlife ecosystems, traps, bodies of water, weather cycles, and a big focus on surviving these elements. I had mentioned terrain. Now, instead of symmetrical corridors with alcoves and lockers, Snake can climb trees, hide inside of rotting tree stumps, as well as blend into tall grass. Of course, all of this would be too easy if you could just go invisible. At the time, and this is crazy to say, Splinter Cell was still fresh, and the light meter system was an evolution for the stealth genre. In response, Kojima's team implemented a camouflage system for Snake Eater. In Splinter Cell, the more exposed you were, the meter would trend into the light. When moving back into the shadows, it trended back down. In Snake Eater, the more your clothing matches your environment, the higher percentage you'll get and the more hidden you are. In this regard, it's kind of a matter of taste on which system you prefer. I love both series and enjoy playing either separately, but I will say that the light meter in Splinter Cell is much simpler and a bit more user-friendly. And admittedly, it can become slightly cumbersome to have to enter a menu every time you wish to change your outfit to match your surroundings. However, a few points. Firstly, I love seeing that number go up, and it's very satisfying to be at 85% camo before applying the right face paint and watching that extra 10% get tacked on. Secondly, the camouflage menu tells you how much you'll gain or lose for your current environment, so it's not that hard. Last but not least, there are a ton of unlockable camo options. Some you'll find as you explore, but there are also special collectible camos that you get from defeating each boss non-lethally. Some of them are debatably useful. I mean, I don't think I ever use the Fears camo because it drains too much stamina, but the Moss camo you get for shaking down the end can get you to 100% camouflage in the right environment. And make sure you try out the one from Volgan during the motorcycle chase. Just turn your back on the enemy. There are goofy ones too, like the Fly camo where you smell like feces, preventing the enemy from charging you in combat. And you know what? Ultimately, I gotta say, I just like dressing Snake up to look cool. Yeah, what about it? Maybe playing The Sims as a kid influenced my mind or something, I don't know, and I don't care. I love running the Sorrows camo with zombie face paint, it just looks cool. And because the cutscenes aren't pre-rendered, you wear your outfit through them, and that can get interesting.
You're crocked, aren't you?
But either way, the camo system increases the stealth gameplay tenfold, and I still love seeing that percentage nice and high as I stalk my enemies or try to just ghost right past them. Some of the more modern-ish, although they're getting old now, stealth games made ghosting much smoother and quicker, like Dishonored. My beloved Dishonored. Snake Eater is more of a patient man's game. Now, yes, there are those animals out there that speed run through this thing fully undetected, and I don't know how they do it, but it's amazing to watch. But for us mere mortals, patience and timing are everything. Now, Snake can run, but instead of sprinting full tilt like you did in the prior games, you need to use the new stalking ability. When you run full blast, the enemy can hear you coming, just like Splinter Cell. However, with the D-pad, Snake will walk quietly, allowing you to creep up. This also applies while crawling. The thrill of approaching a bad guy in stalk mode, just hoping that he doesn't turn on you, is still a pleasure after all these years. Then of course, when you do get close, you have even more options now.
Freeze!
Like in Sons of Liberty, Snake can hold up enemies and shake them down for items. This is still plenty useful in Snake Eater. You can still put opponents in a chokehold as well, only now you can interrogate them at knife point. You can extract all sorts of useful information about troop counts, animal factoids, and even special codec frequencies, including one that will heal Snake while you listen to music. Just, be careful. Whoopsie. Snake can do a lot more than the old punch kick now too. The boss trained Snake on CQC in the lore. What that means for the player is that you can knock someone out with the earth. Then you can trank them for extra nanites. It's a fantastic update from the mostly bare bones melee in the previous games. Ideally, you'd sneak right by sentries, but having extra tools is always good. Because this is set 40 years before the first Metal Gear Solid, Snake doesn't have his handy-dandy Soliton radar, so to compensate, you're given a few options to detect opponents. You're given a motion detector, which obviously detects bodies in motion, both animal and human. You can also equip active sonar, which releases a burst sound wave that picks up life in motion or at rest. It offers more control, but it makes noise. Both of these items consume battery as well, limiting their use, which is great because you can't simply spam them constantly. You can eat Russian glowcap mushrooms to replenish a little battery, and there's a camo that prevents drain, but you have to find these glow caps, and the camo doesn't work everywhere. This also applies to breakable weapon suppressors, which was brilliant from a gameplay perspective. Like the batteries, it prevents the player from abusing the cans throughout the game, and it nudges the player into being a little more creative when passing through an area, if stealth is your thing. But they don't break after 5 shots or anything like that, and you can find extras lying around. It's not too bad. Just don't suck. Point is, the game doesn't encourage you to use tools as a crutch. It's great that the gadgets exist, especially for newcomers, but Snake Eater is much more rewarding when you strip away the gizmos and learn to depend on what you can see and what you can hear. That's where the directional mic comes in. The mic was available in Sons of Liberty, but it was more of a gimmick for special scenarios or for Easter eggs. Here, because you can't always see your enemies, you can scout your next play by listening for rustling grass or the crunch of boots over earth. There's also an anti-personnel sensor that will vibrate and beep as you approach someone. But really, if you want the ultimate experience, crank the difficulty up, ditch the gear, and use your eyes and ears. Of course, it does help that the camera was altered. In the original version of Snake Eater, you only had the traditional fixed Metal Gear Solid camera angles, top down. While this was perfectly fine for the tight hallways of old, I have to admit that it was a bit of a drag when I first played this game, especially having played the first 2 Splinter Cells already, where you could fully control the camera. Without the Soliton radar, it was kind of a pain to have to stop every few meters to pop into first-person mode, even with the items at your disposal. I still played the game multiple times and I loved it immensely, but it's amazing how much better Snake Eater became with the controllable third-person camera. The change was introduced in Subsistence, a special updated double-disc edition of Snake Eater released in late 2005. It was real simple. We all wanted the Splinter Cell camera in Metal Gear, and it was sweet when it finally arrived. At times, the old camera is useful for panning your immediate area from overhead, and in situations like the motorcycle chase, the original angles were carefully crafted to be as dramatic as possible, and they look phenomenal. But I couldn't imagine going back to the old camera as your only option. And in general, the overall control scheme hasn't aged super gracefully, especially if you've never tried this game before. Now, for me, it's not an issue at all because I've played the game 10,000 times over the years, but even I have to admit, I had been away from Snake Eater for about 2 years, and it took me a second to adjust. Sneaking and stalking, tactical reloads, climbing trees, and hanging from ledges, these are all easy to pick up, but certain weapons, especially long guns, are more burdensome. When you equip a sniper, Snake automatically goes into first-person view. From here, your feet are glued to the ground. You can shoot from the hip for some reason, but you have to look through the glass with L1 and then tap triangle if you want to zoom in or out. Quick tap R2 to unequip. It's not bad when you're taking patient, quiet shots from prone, but these controls are sluggish when fighting Volgin on the Shagohod. This is especially noticeable on the PS2 original, where the frames chug when a lot happens on screen. Equip the RPG, shoot, then unequip. Scroll the sniper, shoot, unequip. Re-equip RPG, which you then may need to unequip again to run away from incoming fire. And when you're playing with a DualShock, you can use the pressure-sensitive buttons to have even more control. When aiming some weapons like the AK or the M16, you lightly depress the fire button to take slack out of the trigger, and then fully depress to shoot. If you interrogate an enemy and push just too hard, the guy gets an envelope on his neck. On other consoles, you simply press the left stick to lower your weapon. As neat as the pressure-sensitive buttons are, and it was really cool when Metal Gear Solid 2 came out, sometimes you might fat finger them and have a negligent discharge and boom, alert phase. And let me tell you, if you don't already know, the alerts in this game are kind of a pain. The initial alert and evasion phases are pretty similar to the first two games, but the caution phase takes forever to go away. I get that this is to punish sloppy playing, and I really love the caution song, it's a great track, but it simply takes too long. And if Patrol happens to discover a sleeping sentry nearby, the time goes right back to 99 and it begins all over. It's even worse when you're crawling on your gut and you collide with one of the map's vertices and it pops you right up into crouch mode, leading to being caught. And when you're caught, the AI is thorough. They can do the occasional dumb stuff. And like any other game, they have their weaknesses, and some of these blind spots are exploited by speedrunners all the time. But just playing, quote, the normal way, the enemy troops are quite adept. If they see you, they will hunt you, and they'll bring their boys. They can even hear you better now. Playing the game on European Extreme, where you instantly fail when you're detected, really beefs up enemy senses, and you'll be sweating at a few points, like when escaping Groznygrad without camo, or taking down Ocelot's GRU troops. Who will GRU be tonight? That's the question. So yeah, sometimes with this old control scheme, you'll need some gymnastic fingers, but if you're patient, it really is a fun game to play, and that's not to mention the survival mechanics. So instead of popping a ration to regain health like games of old, Snake needs to relax and recover life. Lying in prone speeds this process up. Yes, there are ampoules that act like the old rations, but these are in short supply, especially on hard or extreme. Your healing rate is also directly influenced by your stamina, the bar under your life meter. Running, crawling, climbing, and fighting makes a fella hungry, and Snake needs to keep his energy up. If it drops too low, his hands will tremble when you're aiming, or even crazier, his stomach will growl, and enemies can actually hear that. If you haven't noticed, the level of detail in Snake Eater is insane. You can find quick-hit food like calorie mates and instant noodles, and since they taste good, Snake will be happy and regain a ton of stamina. Yeah, another detail, Snake has digital taste buds, and he really has a thing for certain animals and certain fruits. You can trank small animals to preserve freshness, or if you're clever, you can capture a poisonous or venomous creature to use against your enemies. Throwing a snake at a sentry is always good, but this also works against a few bosses too. Just remember, red touches black, you're okay Jack. Red touches yellow, you're one dead fellow. If you hunt your food and come back to your save file a few days later, it will have begun to rot based on your console's time clock. The fact that you can equip your rotten food in your inventory and toss it to a certain boss that gets hungry is unbelievably clever. If Snake eats it, he'll get food poisoning. No, really, not only that, you'll need to head into your survival viewer to ingest some medicine. Now, Snake can incur damage that will leave lasting problems if you don't carry out proper medical care. Burns need ointment and sterile bandages, broken bones need proper splinting, and stamina-draining leeches just need a good cigar. Now, thankfully, none of this stuff is overly complicated, and you get plenty of supplies, but it's still such a wonderful addition to the formula. Sure, there are other games with survival mechanics, but Snake Eater has the perfect blend of managing your skills, your stealth, and your health. I will say, I do hope that the upcoming remake, Delta, makes the survival viewer a little more streamlined and on the fly, but if it doesn't, I'll still be happy enough with the old system. Something that will not need much of an update though is the Sandbox gameplay. interactable world created for Snake Eater is still, all these years later, so much fun to play around in. The survival stuff is great and all, but it's the other stuff around the essential mechanics that adds tremendous depth to the gameplay. It's the little things, like bringing down a hornet's nest on an unsuspecting enemy, watching him scurry off, only to bring the hornets to his buddies and then watching all of them run off. Or cutting the ropes, maintaining the balance of this bridge, which causes it to sway dangerously. Challenge yourself, cut them all, and try to make it across without slipping. Look, I used to play this game a lot. Even goofy stuff like the croc cap, a special cover that, resembles a crocodile. It's good, silly fun, classic tongue-in-cheek Metal Gear, but there are uses for it. During this sequence, hover troops are searching for us. Don the croc cap, swim underwater, and you get by no problem. It's great, and there are so many little things like this in the game. To this day, I'll occasionally learn a new trick or an Easter egg from Snake Eater, and it's a true testament to the love and craftsmanship that was put into this experience. You can even spin Snake around in the viewer to make him blow chunks. But ultimately, it's the stealth sandbox areas that keep me coming back. Of course, I'm a huge fan of the first two games. I used to play through the tanker mission 3 nights a week as a young lad, trying to get perfect ghost runs. But the addition of organic elements like grass, mud, and bark intermixed with man-made structures, such as the one in Rosfit, offers so much creativity for fans of stealth gaming. And the further you get into Snake Eater, you procure even more equipment and the level variety opens up. Progressive expansion, paced just right, and with options to play how you like. Be John Rambo with the LMG and the shouting, or be Leon the Professional and get in close with your blade. The choice is yours. This also extends into the points of entry. Snake Eater is more or less a linear game with a small amount of backtracking, but some areas have strongholds with multiple entryways. Some are obvious, and some are tucked away. I wish I could go back and play this again for the first time, just to feel the excitement of discovery once more. Or to feel anything. It's not all jungle either. The interior locations are great, like the Graniny Gorky lab. It's classic Metal Gear Solid, but with a twist. These structures are symmetrical and man-made, but Snake has a costume for blending in. With your lab coat and sexy specs, the guards won't bother you unless you act erratic, like climbing on tables and shit, but the scientists will notice that you're not in their ranks and will sound the alarm. Those little weasels. In the second area, you have to knock out and steal the outfit of Major Ivan Rydenovich Rykov. You get it? Snake just so happens to have a handy-dandy Raiden mask to complete the disguise. These areas kinda remind me of Hitman, wherein you can disguise yourself and get around, but some NPCs are programmed to know better. And I will never complain about games being more like Hitman, ever. You can't use weapons in the scientist's disguise, but you can find a knockout handkerchief, and you get one of my favorite items in the game, the cigarette gas knockout spray. This is straight out of The Spy Who Loved Me, with Anya Amasova's sleeping gas cigarette, and it's great. They're quaint and quirky and fit perfectly into this very Bond-esque world under Kojima's oddball charm. But when you're dressed up as Rykov, you can run around freely and simply slap the taste out of everyone. It's quite enjoyable, frankly, to batter these nincompoop rats. And if you smack around the soldiers, they have to salute you and thank you for this lesson. So, I get that the Rykov stuff was meant to be a self-deprecating dig at Kojima's controversial character. Raiden received a mountain of hate after Sons of Liberty, and I've always appreciated that Kojima could poke fun at his own creation in Snake Eater. But unfortunately, it's an undercooked segment. It's fun enough to walk around battering comrades with impunity, of course, but I really wish there could have been more of an in-depth infiltration mission with this disguise. A recent game that did this concept well was Black Ops Cold War with Operation Red Circus. At least you can use the mask one more time to make Volgan do that creepy toddler walk. Oh well, maybe you can do more as Rykov in the remake. Maybe not. Maybe I'll go fuck myself. So, I definitely prefer to play Snake Eater as quietly as possible without a single fatality, but sometimes you have to raise the flag and start cutting throats. Your knife is plenty good for this. If you need stopping power though, the M1911 is always good. You can't argue with the handgun that won 2 World Wars, and we all know the scene where Snake fills his shorts when talking about it. I feel that. Of course, if you need something beefier, the Kalashnikov is always reliable in nearly every video game ever, and that's no different here. You have access to the M16 as well. Not much difference gaming-wise from the AK, but you do get a 3-round burst option and you can install a suppressor, which makes a Panther playthrough a whole lot of fun. But nothing beats a good old trusty rusty like the M37. When you need the thing right in front of you, deader than dead, except no substitutions, this thing is a riot. For the ambush-oriented gentleman in you, there's always a good claymore. You can even see the metal pellets disperse once tripped. Brutal and effective. Speaking of effective, if you detonate TNT around this particular helicopter in this area, it won't be present in the first section of the mountains later on. Instead, it's replaced by a hover troop. It's such a relief to get rid of this pest for a short period of time, and the fact that someone programmed this is another example of that extra mile that the team was known for. When you need to reach out and touch someone, the SVD is highly effective, and outside of the clunky controls like we talked about, you really can't go wrong here. The single action army is decent. It's cool to pull off trick shots like ricocheting a bullet up under a shield, but it's not my go-to. But of course, if you really want to go full John Rambo, there's always the RPG and the M63 Stoner machine gun. Have fun. I could sum up this entire section by saying that the boss fights in Metal Gear Solid 3 are amazing. They're classics, and frankly, where I feel the series peaked. The first Solid game had bosses that are stamped in cement for all time. They're iconic. Revolver Ocelot, Psycho Mantis, Vulcan Raven Part 1 and 2, yada yada. Metal Gear Solid 2 had some great ones, like Fat Man and Olga, and I liked the boss fights in 4. Some of them were clever and interesting. 5? Yeah, I guess. Ocelot is your first proper boss fight. I love the setting. A chasm between the two warriors, Snake's possible retreat being blocked by the GRU commandos, and the very Western film influence, down to a showdown at high noon and a goddamn tumbleweed that rolls by. The fight really helps to establish in the player's mind to think outside of simply tanking your enemy and to be creative. Snake can drop a hornet's nest on Ocelot, throw a cobra his way, and so forth. And this is something that comes into play with each fight going down the line. And Ocelot uses his trademark ricochet bullets to root you out of your little camp spot. Like Ocelot, there is a natural barrier between you and the pain, so you can't close the distance. The Pain controls Hornets to drop grenades on you, form weapons like his Tommy gun, or even coat Snake to freeze you in place. At the halfway point, he starts to send out Hornets like bullets. It's completely absurd, but Over the Top was threaded into this series from day one, and that's how it should be. You can use smokes to remove his B armor before breaking a shot off, and let me tell you, On an extreme, non-lethal run, this can be really difficult. The controls cause the fight to be mildly annoying, and I've thrown a number of bombs right over his shoulder, but it's not too obtrusive once you get the hang of it. I just love the madness of the pain, cloning himself with bees and silly stuff like that. But the cobras get much, much crazier from here. The Fear uses a crossbow, and his bolts are dipped in the venom of a Brazilian wandering spider. A symptom of this can include extended priapism. I can't make two solid snake jokes in one review. Anyway, the Fear leaps between trees and scurries around like Spider-Man, and has an extended forked tongue to look extra weird. You can damage him with your big guns and that's all fine, but if you trank him, he'll start to hunt and gather food to regain stamina. It adds a significant amount of urgency to hurry up and prevent that. If you're deft, you can throw some of your rotten food his way to make him sick, opening him up to some extra shots. There's an insane speedrun strategy that makes the fight trivial, but if you're new or if it's been a while, take your time and play around. It's a great fight. Of all the great fights in gaming history, Slave Knight Gale in Dark Souls 3, Agni and Rudra in Devil May Cry 3, just Devil May Cry 3 in general, anytime I think back on my all-time favorites, I automatically think of the end. This is one big game of cat and mouse, sniper versus sniper, patiently waiting, listening to the sounds of the forest, and then you'll notice the glint of his scope and it's time to set up a shot. Sniping is great, of course, but I've always loved to play in the style of hunter becomes the hunted. It's so cool to strip down to your trank and knife, sneaking up on the geezer before shaking him down for his items, including that special camo I mentioned. It's incredibly satisfying even to this day, and if you defeat him non-lethally, you get his rifle as an extra special reward. Or you can equip your shotgun. Walk up quietly and give Grandpa his medicine.
Fight like a man.
And if this is all the fight could be, it would still be a classic, but oh no, it goes much deeper. If you take too many trank darts, Snake will faint and be captured, where he's returned to jail and has to make his way back to the battlefield to try again. It goes on, listen some more. If you save at the start of the fight, turn off the game, jump your console's internal clock a week forward, and then load your save, the end will literally have died of old age. No, I'm not kidding. I discovered this accidentally one time after saving my game and not playing for about a week. I still remember being confused and utterly amazed at this kind of detail, but we're still not done. There's one more way that I know of to defeat the end, and that's to do it early. If you catch him getting wheeled away on this dock, pull out your sniper quickly after the cutscene and just blast away. When you get to the area you normally fight him in, GRU soldiers will be patrolling instead. So, congrats. You shot an old dude in his wheelchair. Okay, so this isn't a boss, but I couldn't go on without mentioning the ladder. Following the end, there's a very memorable scenario, and all it is Snake climbing a really, really tall ladder. I vividly remember this from my first playthrough and thinking, man, this ladder goes on a while. I thought there might have been something wrong with my game. And then you start to hear an a cappella version of the main theme of the game, Snake Eater by Cynthia Harrell. This is when I realized that this isn't just climbing a ladder. Snake at this point has defeated so many foes, including nearly all of the Cobras, and has endured so much hardship. To me, this scene represents Snake really starting to earn his status as a bit of a legend. He's slowly earning his stripes. This moment of calm reflection before getting into the second half, which is where things get much crazier. And indeed they do. This is the most madcap of all the Cobras. I love the character of the Fury, the pyromaniac cosmonaut. The fight's not complicated. There are multiple symmetrical lanes with alcoves for cover, and it's fun to play with some of your toys, especially claymores. It is, ironically, infuriating when you're attempting a non-lethal run on Extreme, but there's a camp spot to exploit, so And on any other difficulty, it's pretty breezy. The pace of the fight is relentless, with moments of stress as you hear him walking about, making clatter with his suit and flamethrower. I love watching these dark corridors get lit up by flames, seeing this madman become increasingly unhinged. And the ending cutscene is purebred, extravagant Japanese madness in its greatest form. Following the incredibly brutal torture scene with Volgin, Snake, in classic Metal Gear form, has to escape a holding cell. Before you escape, you might want to save and then load your game. We'll talk more about that in a separate video. Snake has to escape the base with nothing more than a fork and a revolver and some cigarette gas spray if you were friendly to Johnny.
You should always be friendly to Johnny.
Afterwards, to escape Ocelot, Snake jumps from the outlet of a sewer system high above the ground and lands right into a battle with the final Cobra, the Sorrow. The Sorrow is a deceased Cobra member, having been killed by the boss as a part of her mission, as I had mentioned earlier. This fight isn't really much of a fight, it's more of a walkthrough of Snake's subconscious, a lesson. Every animal and person that Snake has ended will walk towards you on this lake of ghosts, akin to the river Styx. As you pass by, fallen enemies will reach out to you, screaming in pain as their slashed neck sprays vitality. Now, it is a tad bit cheesy with the cliched, spooky moaning of some of the ghosts, but the message stands. These were people, and you took their lives. Now, if you played non-lethally, the walk is much quicker, and the Sorrow will mention how impressed he is. And this highlights something that I really love about Snake Eater. A non-lethal playthrough is not only a challenge, but it's worthy and it's actively rewarded. Special camos, a bonus weapon, and unique twists on sequences like this. You also get a very special, super useful camo from the Sorrow for your troubles. The first battle against Volgin is electrifying. Sorry. This is a great fight though, just two warriors going head to head. Oddly, I think this fight is actually a little easier when you're attempting a non-lethal run. Rykov mask, Mosin, and then some CQC and Tranks. If you're holding a loaded weapon and get hit with a bolt, it will burst your ammo, which is pretty cool. He has AoE attacks, but once you get the hang of it, it shouldn't be too hard. And you get the USSR USA camo, which really comes in handy in the next sequence. The motorcycle chase scene where Snake and Eva are pursued by Volgin in the Shagohod is not a boss fight per se, but it's a big flashy scenario where you're getting chased by a big monster, so I thought it fit here. This is easily the most bombastic, Hollywood-esque sequence in the game. I have to admit, it's not my favorite part of Snake Eater. I generally dislike anything on rails, and this is heavily scripted, so the first playthrough is great, but subsequent playthroughs are kind of boring. However, the chase is well choreographed and paced, with some thrilling moments like the Shagohod flipping giant tanks like hamburgers. And it is fun to let loose here, as you get infinite ammo for everything, and you can just let RPGs fly to your heart's content. And it's pretty stress-free, and it's more for the spectacle over anything else. The chase in Metal Gear 4, when going for the Big Boss emblem, may or may not have caused me to shatter a DualShock back in the day, but you know. The second Volgin fight is the special Metal Gear battle. The Shagohod, to me, is much more interesting than the endless Metal Gear Ray fight in Sons of Liberty. The basic concept of rockets to damage a big machine is unchanged, but the presentation is light years beyond too. The motorcycle battle part and then the on-foot David and Goliath sequence, the sunny, slightly cold Russian sky above you as you spar with this madman on the edge of a bluff. It's almost perfect. Almost. What drags this segment down is what I mentioned previously about the clunky controls and the frame rate slowing down during heavy action. It's better on the HD versions, but it's not perfect, and the PS2 original can be kinda painful at a few points. I guess that's the cost of pushing the machine to its limits. Also, it's kinda weird how Eva and Snake are having a big hug while this dude behind them is being barbecued, but whatever. What's not hilarious is the Eva escort. If you know what you're doing, this segment is pretty easy. If you don't, or if you make a single misstep, this section is kinda corny. Eva took a branch to the gut and was badly injured. You have to get her through these woods as you're being pursued by bad guys. Her stamina drains quickly, and she limps along nice and slow. Does Snake, big bad big boss himself, put her on his shoulders and haul ass? No. He just sort of waves his hand impatiently. What a legend. Like I said, if you know the path, you can pull it off pretty easily, but it's still kind of a dull spot. And Eva getting busted by the enemy troops is always so annoying. What's not annoying, however, is what follows, the final battle. The final fight is, of course, against the boss. I always laugh when thinking about the final boss literally being called the boss, but this is also the highlight of the entire series for me. All through the game, we're shown that Snake is just not as good as the boss. She handedly defeats him time and time again in multiple cutscenes. Now the player has control. Let's see how much you've learned over the whole 20-hour experience. What also makes this fight brilliant is that Snake does not want to hurt this woman. She's the final objective, and Snake knows that if he doesn't win, the nukes will fly. You killed Volgan because he was a monster, but the boss is Snake's mentor, his hero, and he loves her. But he has to do this. The boss knows this too, which is why she's goading him into fighting. Lethal fighting is fine, throw on the thermals and snipe away, but where's the honor in that? Quit being a pussy and remember the basics of CQC. To be honest, I don't understand 100% how it works, but I generally just press the melee button and hold in the direction of which she's attacking from, and it seems to work most of the time. And outdoing the boss in hand-to-hand combat before breaking off a few tranks is ultra satisfying. After watching Snake get whooped on all game, it's exhilarating that you, the player, are the one finally turning the tables. And there's the time limit. If you don't defeat the boss in under 10 minutes, a nuclear bombing run will be commenced. I love that they didn't put a big, obnoxious clock on the screen, but rather, the main theme begins to play over the fight as the timer counts down in the background. This is a genius touch and a masterful bit of digital art. Defeating your ultimate foe while your theme song plays behind you is phenomenal, and this is where Snake is truly surpassing his mentor to become Big Boss. You can also capture some very special snakes around the area. Snake and Eva sitting in a tree, Fucking with cloning. After the boss is defeated, you're given control one more time, and just like James Sunderland at the end of Silent Hill 2, you, the player, must take the final shot. I've already mentioned some of the slowdown with heavy action, so there's no need to belabor that point. And yes, lip syncing and facial animations are certainly nowhere near where they are nowadays, but for a PlayStation 2 game, Snake Eater is right at the top with games like Okami and Shadow of the Colossus. The cutscenes are, of course, stylish, flashy, and very much like a movie, but for the people that have always said that Hideo Kojima would have been happier as a filmmaker, I don't know about that. There's no way that dude could express himself completely in a 2-hour span. I know that some people don't care for the long cutscenes, but I genuinely, sincerely love them. It's not a fanboy thing. It's mostly because I love the characters and the broader scope of the lore, but they're also just fun to watch, and some of the cinematography is pretty stellar. Snake and the boss reaching for one another, Ocelot's jammed round gets dislodged over the backdrop of Snake whooping his ass, which is a bit of fun. Unlike the torture scene, which is not so much fun. Instead of these artistic angles, we see a shift into chaotic, handheld-style footage. This, of course, builds tension and keeps up the madness of this horrifying scene. As good as this is, the moment-to-moment visuals are where it's at. I've always adored the waist-high tall grass. Not only how well each blade is rendered, but how they depress and fold as you cross over them. It's such a simple detail, but it's amazing, and I can't wait to see the effect in the remake. That's right, I love fake grass. Fight me, goddammit. And this is just the start. Get waist-high in a muddy swamp, and your pants will be caked in the stuff. And the animations for various animals were clearly studied and replicated with great detail. Crocodiles cooling themselves off, snakes resting on a branch or slithering through the grass, or even just little frogs swimming across the surface of the water. If you down a bad guy in the mountains, the vultures flying around the area will eventually start to pick at their bodies. This is an insane detail. Apparently, these birds go for the stinky donut first. So I remember spent brass floating in water all the way back to games like Duke Nukem 3D in '96, but it doesn't make it less impressive in Snake Eater. Snake will tread water while respecting his weapon by holding it up out of the water. These effects weren't make or break, but Kojima's team always went the extra mile. And for a PS2 game, it's amazing the type of atmosphere they could create. Rain is downright soothing. The effect of droplets plinking off of every surface is convincing, especially with Snake's own individual reflective surface separate from his surroundings. And when the rain passes, a fog rises, and you can practically smell this jungle haze. Imagine the smell of swamp ass. The shimmering of a torch's flame inside of a wet cave, bouncing off of the minerals in the walls. Just lovely. And although the HD version is superior, with increased resolution and a higher frame rate, the PS2 version still looks excellent in areas like this. And obviously a game from 20 years ago can't keep up with modern tech, but the art style is still impeccable and it's timeless. Then there's the lovely view of the sunlight peeking through the jungle canopy. I'm a sucker for God rays, what can I say? There's something so serene about the digital jungle. Pause for 5 minutes sometime and watch the butterflies float amidst the sunbeams with the sound of the forest behind you and tell me you don't feel slightly better. Come on, don't be shy. Let's do it together. Ready? That's better. So look, I know how long this video is, okay? I'm watching the timer. I'm tempted to ramble on for another hour about the audio design in Snake Eater, I really am, but brevity is the soul of wit, and I'm not too bright, so I'll flex some measure of intelligence and speed things up a bit. Long story short, the sound design in Snake Eater is a masterclass. It's absolutely impeccable on nearly every single level. The ground underneath your feet crunches and becomes tamped with your weight. Birds sing and communicate. The soft footsteps of your enemies as they patrol, running water, the of the suppressed shot, and the satisfying click of the slide being re-racked. Of course, you have the iconic sounds of menus and item boxes being toiled with in real time. The very James Bond-esque Snake Eater theme is legendary. It's slightly cheesy, but so were some of the James Bond themes, and those were awesome too. Again, I don't want to go on all day long, and it should go without saying, but I have to say it. David Hayter is the definitive voice of Snake. I don't give a shit which generation we're talking about. And to Konami's credit, they are bringing him around for the remake and labeling him as the voice of Big Boss, as it should be. To be fair, Kiefer Sutherland's voice is amazing. His role in Phone Booth is extremely underrated, and he carried it with his voice alone. And I've always thought that it would have been perfect for him to be Venom Snake, and then a certain voice would come back with a certain character at the end of Metal Gear 5, but By some accounts, not least of which is David Hayter himself, it seems Kojima had been trying to recast Snake for quite a while, and apparently he wanted Kurt Russell for Big Boss. That would have been neat and all. I'm a huge fan of the guy's movies, but David will always be Snake. One last thing, okay? And this is a personal hang-up. Lori Allen, the voice of the boss, does an excellent job for this game. She crushed the role in every way, and I wouldn't be able to hear the character from anyone else's mouth. But she was also the voice of Pearl in SpongeBob, and I can always hear it. When she's going on about an emotional topic like loyalty and sacrifice, in the back of my mind, I can just hear her ordering a salad. Either way, she is the boss. Some of the Cobras are a little silly, and some of Eva's written dialogue is kind of cringy, and it always has been, but every voice in this game is memorable, and I wouldn't change a thing. Hopefully, the remake agrees. Yeah, of course, I've watched all the footage of the upcoming Snake Eater remake, being referred to as Metal Gear Solid Delta instead of 3. It's odd, but whatever. I'm not going to rant about giving it a chance like I did with Silent Hill 2, which, in my opinion, turned out to be phenomenal. The Delta footage shown thus far is breathtaking, especially for a longtime fan. Evidently, they're attempting to be as faithful as possible to the original, and having just played Snake Eater 3 times in a row for this script, my reference is fresh. Based on that, it looks like they may achieve this goal. There is still plenty of time to mess it up, make no mistake. But if the final product holds up to the trailers, and more importantly to the original game, I'll be psyched out of my mind. I do hope they streamline some of the things I've mentioned in this review, but even if they don't, this could be something truly special. And I've been reading on Reddit how the Silent Hill 2 remake is getting younger people into Silent Hill. All these kids are going, "Oh, I never played the original, but I love this remake. Where can I find the original?" etc, etc. So the remake for that game did a great job of bringing people into this world. I sincerely hope that Delta is just as good and can introduce people to Metal Gear Solid. When could that ever be a bad thing? Ah, fuck. Ultimately, do you know what I like most about Metal Gear Solid 3? Do you know why I come back every few years for another run, despite being 20 years past its freshness date? Is it the anti-nuke message? I mean, I agree with that, but no. Is it the soundtrack? One of my favorites ever, but nope. Is it the magnificent story filled with themes of love, loyalty, nurturing, growing, and losing faith? I've watched every cutscene about 100 times, but it's not that. It's that Snake Eater is fun to play. Yes! I just like playing this video game. Every time I play it, I feel like trying something new, and even if I slide back into my favorite style, I still get that rush and gratification from executing my sneaky plan. I love the camo, medicine, and food. Yeah, systems could be streamlined, but it pumps me up to get that extra 5% camouflage by changing face paint. Some people in the world see adults playing video games and they'll say, "They should get a life." Okay, what's that? Going to the bar and feeling like shit in the morning? Paying $500 to $1,000 to see some concert? Going to batting cages and go-karts? Yeah, that's not childlike fun, is it? Well, I don't know how you personally define being an adult, but I work my 40+ hours. I cut the grass, I shovel snow, I pay the tax man, and I prepare food for my tribe. I hoist heavy iron at 0500, something 98% of so-called adults don't have the fortitude to practice or the balls to keep up with. I read, study, I play instruments, and guess what? I love rolling around in the fake mud in a fake Russian jungle while changing outfits and putting on makeup as the world's manliest fake man to ever be written into modern fiction. So, I guess if you are an adult and have an issue with that, You can pop me into your mouth or go back to your boxed wine and cats, you lonely bitch. Oh, I love Snake Eater.